As I wait for the Solomon Islands to open back up to do some further filming, I thought I'd continue making these short videos for you. This is a short video describing one of the generally unknown Japanese diversionary attacks made during the Battle of Bloody Edson's Ridge. On the 13th and 14th of September 1942, the place known to the Japanese as Tor Oka, or Tiger Hill, to the Marines as L Company Ridge, and to the modern Solomon Islands as Panatina Ridge, one of these diversionary attacks occurred. I won't go into too much detail about the background behind the Battle of Bloody Ridge. If you look at one of my other videos on Bloody Ridge, I go into great detail about it. But in this short video, I'll just hit the high points involving this Western attack or diversionary attack. Well, Kawaguchi, if you remember, was the Japanese overall commander. So his plan was to attack 5 battalions. 3 battalions was attacked from the south on the southern perimeter at Bloody Ridge. One was going to go to the east perimeter and attacked the Marines in the 1st Marine Regiment. And another diversionary attack was going to attack from the west down the government trail, or coastal track as they called it, into the 5th Marines lines. All these are going to occur simultaneously. You note on this first map, this was the perimeter the Marines had from August the 7th, and actually on the time, September the 13th, 14th, that these attacks occurred. You'll notice that Vandegrift had a horseshoe-shaped perimeter, and his southern line, he didn't have enough troops to man that, was basically wide open. He had some outposts there. You can see he had the engineers and the pioneers, and he had roving patrols to cover that southern line. They thought the main attacks were going to come on the east-west flanks, and being Marines with an amphibious background, they thought Linger Point was going to be the scene of a major amphibious assault. So that's why Vandegrift put his forces there. Kawaguchi's plan was to have 3 battalions attack directly from the south on Bloody Ridge, to go straight down that bare ridge line, which basically pointed straight to Henderson Field. They were going to come out of the jungle with a night attack. At the same time, he was going to have 2 diversionary attacks, one to the east and one to the west. Well, the days will cover the attack from the west under Colonel Oka, or Oka Force, you'll notice on the map there. So Colonel Oka was the regimental commander of the 124th Regiment, and they had landed on the night of August the 29th and 30th way to the west, while Kawaguchi and the rest of his troops landed way to the east. This next slide is one taken from July 1942. It's taken by a Japanese reconnaissance airplane. You'll see the Japanese writing on the bottom. Don't know what it says. It's been colorized since, but you can see how the layout of the land was the time the Japanese landed. At this stage, they were actually starting the construction of Henderson Field. So down in the bottom there, you'll see the Japanese docks they'd made, and that was Kukum, they called it. So you can see the Marines line there in blue. So they were about 200 meters away from that in the coconut groves, covering that coastal track, and they went inland and hooked up on that ridge there. So the ridge that you'll see the blue line on is the L Company Ridge, and the Japanese attacks I'll describe in detail a bit later. It's a great photo. Kawaguchi had planned for this attack to occur on the night of the 12th and 13th of September. But it's like all 3 Japanese major attacks during the Guadalcanal campaign. This one became very uncoordinated due to a number of factors. So the first night that Kawaguchi attacked, he only attacked with 1 battalion on the southern line. 2 of his battalions are still in the jungle. The Oka attack is supposed to occur on the west. They were still miles away on the Guadalcanal, so they did not attack on the night of the 12th and 13th. So you notice on this map here, this is a modern Google map of the area. The area now is located where the Panatina Ridge, where one of the King George VI schools is, and the actual golf course in Honiara. So if you ever go to Honiara, a golf course, you actually cover the small battle ground. So the 5th Marines had their line here, and it was maintained and it was held by L Company, the 3rd Battalion of the 5th Marines. You can see their lines there on the map. L Company was commanded by Captain Lyman Spurlock. At the time, they had a number of other weapons from the Weapons Company attached to them, such as the 37mm anti-tank guns and a number of the model 1917 heavy machine guns. So one of the main avenues of approach was down that coastal track, and they placed one 37mm anti-tank gun and one heavy machine gun on both sides of that track. This is another aerial photograph taken roughly around the time of the battle, maybe a little bit before it. As you'll note here, the Japanese on the night of 13th and 14th moved down from the west, heading down that coastal track. So this was the 2nd Battalion of the 124th Regiment, so it was basically battalion size. So they moved down in 2 columns. Marine veterans later stated that the Japanese were moving down there in 2 columns, almost in a marching formation, laughing, joking, smoking cigarettes, no noise discipline, no scouts out. It was even as if the Japanese were expecting further troops to come and guide them in. Anyway, the Marines let them approach. When they got about 50 yards away, they initiated their ambush on the coastal track with a 37mm anti-tank gun, firing over 120 something pellets of 30 caliber size. Once the 37mm went off, then the heavy machine guns opened up, followed by the BARs and light machine guns. The Marines were also supported by 75mm pike howitzers, which started laying down fire, and also 81 and 60mm mortars. Once the Japanese got hit quite hard, they retreated quickly down the coastal track, and that basically ended their attack on the left-hand side down the coastal track for the whole night. Now the second Japanese attack came through the jungle and up a ravine and hit the ridge itself, L Company Ridge, held by 2 Marine platoons of L Company. So these Japanese had initial success. They did a couple of charges up the hill. They took some trenches, Marine trench positions. Now you got to understand, Marines this time only had 1 barbed wire line, and which had some ration tins or pebbles in it, and they had some shell scrapes or small shell holes in that coral ridge, so they wouldn't dug in that hard. But they also they were supported by heavy machine guns, light machine guns, and artillery and mortars. So once the Japanese, they pushed the Marines back, Marines did some counterattacks, and that went back and forth throughout the evening. When the daylight came, the Japanese occupied certain points on the ridge crest. The Marines once again counterattacked, and they were driven off by the Marines without artillery or even mortar support here because it was so close. The Marines used a number of rifled grenades that were attached into their 1903 rifles. Around noontime, Marines used a 60mm mortar and some more rifle grenades. They drove the remaining Japanese off that ridge. But the firing and sniping continued all day long. So in the afternoon of the 14th, a couple of platoons from K Company pushed, and they re-established the contact between the ridge and the beach positions. And that night on the 14th and 15th, the firing did go back and forth, but the Japanese never did another major assault on the ridge itself. So on the morning of the 15th, the Marines pushed a couple of patrols down the hill to see what they could find where the Japanese had went. They did see no signs of any live Japanese, but they came across some hastily buried Japanese. They counted over 100 dead Japanese bodies there. So this ended the western attack by the Japanese and the diversionary attack. So as you know, the southern attack almost was a success by the Japanese, but the Marines held Bloody Ridge. And then the Kuma attack, I have in one of my my videos. It's called the Overland Track. That's a good video if you want to see it, because I've walked the battlefield there, and it's basically untouched. So that attack to the east petered out too. It was no success. I'll read you a quote from a good book written by a veteran of this actual battle and the other battles of L Company 3-5 on Guadalcanal. It's called On the Canal by Orrin Marion. But Marion states after this fight about his platoon, they were tough and as stubborn as a band of fighting men as any that the United States military has ever been fortunate enough to produce. No communications, no artillery or mortar supporting fire, and they still stacked those attacking Japanese while protecting ridge with only some old, rusty barbed wire and tin can of pebbles.